To see you is the end and the beginning. You carry me, and you go before. You are the journey, and the journey's end. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. It is wonderful to be with you. It's always fun to come from New York to the West Coast, believe me. Especially at this time of year, and as the Bay Area always has that nice balmy 70-degree sunny weather in February. You can't lose. My name is Bruce Torrey, and I want to begin by thanking Audrey and Jeff for allowing me to be here again, here again, to preach on behalf of and beg on behalf of the poorest of God's children in the Caribbean and Latin America, which is the great privilege that I get. Thank Michael and Lynn Yale for putting me up last night. Had a great time with them. So it's been a really, really fun trip. Thank those of you who have supported Food for the Poor in the past, or maybe who, like myself, are regular supporters of Food for the Poor. It's a ministry, obviously, that's very near and dear to my heart. My band will stay relatively in tune. So we're off to a good start. You all know this, so please join in. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. I'll tell you a story about grace this morning. Sort of in tune. That takes place in a land that many of you apparently are familiar with, Honduras. About 2 years ago, I went on a trip there with Food for the Poor to see the ministries that Food for the Poor is involved in, so I'd come out and speak to folks like you. And we flew into San Pedro Sula, not the part of the country you guys are as familiar with, and that's like the big city in Honduras. And we spent 4 or 5 days in and around there seeing the ministries that Food for the Poor is involved in. And I've done a lot of trips like this. I did it with my parish back in Connecticut to do building projects, and I've done a number of trips with Food for the Poor. And it's always my experience that there's always kind of a special moment that happens on these trips, you know, the moment that stands out. Right? And I think on this particular trip, that moment was the same for everybody. And it took place at a garbage dump. We drove about 2.5 hours outside of San Pedro Sula, and we went to a little area called El Merendon, and we drove to the town landfill. And we got there, and it was pretty much like the same as it would be in the United States. It was a landfill. It's a big pile of garbage, right? So we drive in, and we see all these people kind of working around the edges of it. But we actually drove up on top of it. I'd never been on top of a landfill before. It was a new experience. And we got to the top, and just as you would see in the United States, there was a dump truck and a payloader, you know? And there were about 6 or 8 guys standing around, and it looked like a scene from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They all had bandanas over their faces. Not because they were doing anything nefarious, but because the stench was so horrible that, they had to try and do something. It was like about 90 some odd degrees out. It was like 90% humidity, It is literally just an open pile of garbage sitting out in the sun, baking, with the aroma of that garbage wafting up. Right? So we pull up to this place, to the trucks, and we saw that there was also a young woman there with 4 little children, ranging in ages about 5 to 12 maybe. And we were introduced to her. Her name was Carmen. We later met her husband, and we met her children. And we were told that Carmen and her family worked not for the garbage dump, but on top of the garbage dump. And they spent their day sifting through garbage as it came in to see if they could find things that they could recycle, or things that they could sell, or things that they could eat, right? And probably many of you here are aware, because I know you've done some work in other countries, that in developing countries, a lot of times the poorest of the poor will live around garbage dumps, because it's one of the few places where there's actually some kind of material available, you know? So they sift through stuff, and that's what these guys did. Now, we were comforted by the fact that also off on the side of this truck was a tarpaulin, one of those blue tarps you get at Home Depot or Lowe's, suspended on 4 sticks over a couch that someone had thrown out, right? So we're, in our minds, going, well, thank God at least they've got this like kind of tent-like thing up, because when they take a break from work, they can at least get out of the sun for a few minutes, right? Which is when they told us that Carmen and her family lived underneath that tarpaulin. They lived underneath the tarpaulin on top of a garbage dump. That was their entire life. So Carmen is showing us around. She takes her youngest daughter, who's about 5, by the hand, and she's showing us around where, like when she finds things, she'd put them like in little alcoves and stuff, so we're following her around. She's walking in her bare feet over this garbage. I mean, literally, just walking over the garbage. And the last picture in this incredible mosaic is that Carmen was 8 months pregnant at that point with her 5th child. Now, her last child had been born at the garbage dump. She'd never had any prenatal care of any kind, right? She had never had any education of any kind. Her whole life was kind of like built around this dump. That's what she did. That's what she had. So as you can imagine, like we're all, we're like 10 or 12 clergy from the States, living privileged lives, and we are all devastated by this, right? I mean, we'd seen poverty, but we were just really devastated by this. But I maintain that to this day that I was the most devastated. And the reason for that is at that very moment, my middle daughter, Kate, was 8 months pregnant with our first grandchild. So just think about what's going through my head as I'm walking behind this woman. I'm thinking about my daughter and her husband David, who at that point lived outside of Baltimore. They were both teachers. They had a nice little apartment, good health care, every expectation that the child they would have, the little girl, as it turned out, Nora, just turned 2 last June, that Nora would grow up healthy, get a good education, and literally would be able to do anything with her life that she wanted. And I am walking behind a woman who's 8 months pregnant, living at a garbage dump. The comparison was almost more than I could bear, I mean, the social guilt of coming from a rich country, and also just seeing what this woman was going through. It really had a big impact on us. Now, they told us that Food for the Poor at that moment was in the process of trying to get a house built for Carmen and her family, right? So lest you're worried, well, I'm sure you know it from your experience in Honduras, bureaucracy is everywhere. So they had to get permission from the mayor to get a little piece of property, and then once someone had donated a house, one of Food for the Poor's generous donors donated a house, it could go up in like 6 days. So they're on this race to try and get, it's 450 square feet, it's a little house, good door, good roof, and so they're in this race to get this done before she has this child. We, meanwhile, of course, drive off, to do the other things that we were doing, and we basically saw all these ministries that Food for the Poor is involved in, which is just about every aspect of relief and development that you can imagine. Food for the Poor, the name of course suggests feeding, which is what Food for the Poor started out as, and today feeds over 1 million people a day in the Caribbean and Latin America, but quickly expanded into all sorts of development. So from building homes, Food for the Poor has built over 110,000 homes in the Caribbean and Latin America in the last 35 years. It has, it does clean water projects, it does runs or builds or supports orphanages, senior citizens' homes, schools, small business development, you name it, Food for the Poor is involved in it. We saw all these great things, But of course our heads are stuck back at the garbage. So we all finish our trip and we drive home, we fly home to the United States. And about a month later, we get an email from our office. And it says that Carmen and her family, they got a donor for the house, they got the permission for the land, the house went up, and Carmen and her family got into the house before her child, a little girl, also as it turns out, Linda, was born. The person who donated the house had also donated furniture and a year's schooling for the kids and a year's food for the family, as food for the poor, tried to find an alternate means of employment for them so that they could sustain their lives from that point forward. Now, I was not there when Carmen got her house, but I have been present when people have received their house. And it is a phenomenal experience. It is like a resurrection. It's like people have dull, dead eyes and speech, and all of a sudden they come to life. Because the idea of having a secure home after you've lived, whether it's a garbage dump or you've lived in like one of these little shacks made of corrugated metal or plastic or some canvas, completely open to the elements, no security, and all of a sudden you have a home that can withstand the storms of the islands. And you have a lock on the door so you can actually walk away from your home and not worry about who's just going to come in and take stuff away from you, right? It changes people's lives on the most basic level you can possibly imagine. As I said, it's like a resurrection. It really is. And every time I see it, it just brings me back to the core of the gospel, or at least what for me is the core of the gospel, and that is Jesus' ministry to the outcast, to the poor, to the dispossessed, right? Because that's where Jesus' ministry centered. We stand here towards the end of the season of Epiphany, the manifestation of God to the world. So we've been hearing about the early days of Jesus' ministry in Mark. Today we have this and we see in Jesus' ministry right from the outset how he's constantly involved in making people whole. In the case of today's gospel, it's the story of Jesus healing Peter's mother, right? And we see that when God's presence comes into these people's lives, people who are broken are made whole. But let me take you to another gospel at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, because I think it gives more the big picture, and that is the Gospel of Luke. And if you recall, in the Gospel of Luke, in the 4th chapter, Jesus comes at the beginning of his ministry back into his home synagogue in Nazareth, right? And he gets up in front of the congregation, and he opens up the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, where he reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Right? And it's not an accident that the author of the Gospel of Luke begins Jesus' ministry with this. Because what he's telling us is that this is Jesus' mission statement. This is what he will spend his life doing. And it will be the sign of God's presence in the world. And Christians have known this from the earliest days of the church. Right? Christians have always been involved in works of goodwill, of raising people up, making them whole, healing them, giving them things when they're in poverty. Indeed, in the early days of Christianity, Christians were kind of known as the nuts who cared about poor people, because no one else did, right? And that became like one of the big signs of the early Christian church. And of course, it goes down through the centuries to today, where every parish I go to is involved in reaching out to those in need. And Lord knows I can see that St. Paul's does it. I've been on your website and I see all the incredible things you're involved in, not only in Honduras, but locally, the prison ministry and for homeless folks. And it was a list that's longer than most parishes. So I know that desire to reach out with the good news of God's caring love is deeply embedded in this community of faith. Well, I'm here this morning to invite you to be a part of another ministry that does that, and does it in one of the poorest parts of our world. Food for the Poor is one of the largest nonprofit relief and development organizations in the United States. Its ministry is to 17 different countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. And Food for the Poor's ministry is to the destitute poor. to people who sometimes would not even survive without the help that Food for the Poor gives, but certainly are in the most basic need. Food for the Poor feeds over 1 million people a day in the Caribbean and Latin America. It's built over 110,000 homes in the Caribbean and Latin America, and is involved in all those other projects that I mentioned just really briefly when I was telling you the story about Carmen and her family. And does it with an incredible efficiency. 95% of all gifts to Food for the Poor go directly to ministry to and for the poor. So it's an amazing way to reach out and change people's lives. And if you open up the brochures that you were handed this morning, and I know many of you have seen this because I know my good friend Bill Beers was here a few years ago, but I go through this anyway, especially for the folks who are new to Food for the Poor. And you can read through this later, or you can go to foodforthepoor.org and look up the ministry. But if you open this out all the way and are looking at the front page, and then flip it over to the other side, and look to the left of the thick yellow line at what I like to refer to as the mathematics of compassion. Because even still to me, and even to folks like you who I know have done a lot of work in developing countries, you know, it's like in my head, I know how far US dollars go in developing countries. But boy, when you see actual examples of it, it kind of blows you away. So for instance, for $3,600, you can build someone a home like Carmen received. $3,600. As I said, it's about 450 square feet, but it's a solid home with a good roof and a door that locks. And it changes people's lives. It makes an incredible memorial gift for folks who are in a position to do that kind of thing. You get a picture of the family that got the house, so you get a connection with them and see the lives that you have changed. It is a great way to change people's lives, and I really recommend it to you if it's something that's available to you or possible for you. Or do what my parish did a couple of years ago, raise the money for a house as a parish and really have that kind of an impact. On another level, for $285, you can put a water pump in a village. And of course, access to potable water, one of the biggest problems in developing countries, especially for the oldest and youngest people in the societies, who are particularly susceptible to waterborne diseases. And I never walk away, I say it every week, you know, without giving this one because it continues to blow me away. For $43.80, you can feed a starving child for a year. $43.80. Cost Food for the Poor 6 cents to deliver a rice and beans meal to a starving child, or a starving adult for that matter. Twice a day, 365 days a year, $43.80. It's lunch out after Mass. You know? I mean, that just blows my mind. So it's just an incredible way to change lives. And if you put a finger on either side of that thick yellow line and pull, you'll see this is also an envelope. Because as I know you're aware, my brothers and sisters, by now, I am not just here for your compassion this morning. Okay? I'm here for your money. Because money is what changes lives. Money is the gift we have to give. Because what's such a small amount to us has an incredible impact on people in developing countries. So I hope you consider a gift to Food for the Poor this morning. You can do it by cash, credit card, check. You can text it. Text kindness to 51555. It's on the envelope if you want to do that. You can talk to me after Mass. But consider making a gift this morning to this ministry. You can fill this out. Please give us your name and address. We can thank you. You can tax credit for your gift. I'm around for the rest of the morning. You can just hand those to me, and I will bring them back to our office, or I will get them back to our office. And change lives in a fundamental way. Also, I'm going to ask you to consider becoming a regular supporter of Food for the Poor, a pledger, if you will. My wife and I, every year when we don't make our budget, because we don't, but we do two things. We make a pledge out to our parish so that the gospel continues to be proclaimed in our community, and we choose those charities, whether they're secular or religious, that we think are doing the work of Christ in the world, and we support them every month. It's often not a large amount, but boy, $10, $20 a month, you would be amazed at what that adds up to over a couple of years. And then you're constantly in the process of reaching out to those in most need. And that's the whole thing, you know, because every time we reach out to someone, and I don't care if we do it emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, financially, every time we reach out to someone, we become Christ for that person for a brief moment. And that is the gift that we get, right? To be Christ for someone else for a brief moment. And that is an incredible gift. And when we do that, we become the grace of God. So I will end exactly where I began, with grace. Please join me again. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Thank you for having me with you this morning. God bless you. God bless your parish citizens.